In the guitar effects industry, many iconic brands have come and gone in the last 50 years. But in that time, there's been only one Boss. The Boss Compact series has been going strong now since 1977. In that time, it has influenced professional guitar players and amateur enthusiasts alike. From both my amateur research and my years of collecting Boss pedals, I've come to the conclusion that there have been 5 distinctive design periods in Boss's history. These design eras are as follows: the Japanese era Part 1, or the early years, the Japanese era Part 2, the functionality era, the digital era, and the retrospective era. I have covered several of these pedals in other videos that I've made, so to save time in making this video, I'm just going to recycle some of the examples that I made in those other videos. In the early to mid 1970s, Japanese music company Roland were making a number of products aimed at a number of different electric instruments. In 1974, they form a new company called Boss, who will aim their products specifically at guitar players. The first product released under the name Boss was in 1974, and it was an acoustic preamplifier called the Boss, or the B100. The next product they would bring out was in 1976, which was the GE10, which was a 10-band graphic equalizer. But this doesn't really qualify as a pedal as it didn't have a foot switch. The first pedal that they released under the Boss label was this, the Boss CE1, which also happened to be the world's first chorus pedal. This was the first of a number of firsts from Boss. In 1977, Boss released the first 3 of their compact series of pedals. Now, just the chassis design alone was unique. Now, most pedals of this era were very, very large by today's standards. The Boss Compact series were not the first small footprint pedals available. However, the design of the foot switch made them incredibly practical. They had more surface area for their foot switch than any other pedal on the market. The section of the pedal with the controls has been recessed below the level of the foot switch to make it difficult to accidentally change some of the knobs with your foot while operating the pedal. Quite clearly, a lot of thought has gone into this design. Not only is it still being used today, but it's been copied countless times since. The first 3 pedals were nicknamed the Traffic Light series owing to their red, green and yellow colours. The green pedal in this series was the PH1 phaser. Now, given the fact that phaser was a very popular effect in the 70s, it's not surprising that phaser was one of their first pedals. The red pedal here is the SP1 Spectrum. If you've never seen one of these before, I'm not surprised because they are one of the rarest Boss pedals ever made. I remember back in the 90s, someone offered to sell me one of these for about $50 and I declined because I didn't know what it did and he couldn't really explain it. But it's really quite simple. It's just a 1-band parametric EQ. The Spectrum knob chooses the frequency and the balance knob boosts that frequency. So as Josh Scott would say, you can use it as a more better device. The third and most significant of these first 3 pedals was the OD1 Overdrive. This was the world's first widely available soft clipping overdrive. This is basically the parent of the whole tube screamer style of overdrive pedal. Now, there are many quirks to do with these early Boss pedals, which I have covered at length in another video. So if you want to know more about that, please watch that other video.
For full details, see my published works.
One of the quirks that this pedal has is the momentary LED, meaning that when I turn it on, the LED will flash and then go back off again. In 1978, Boss brought out 4 new additions to the compact pedal line. And already we can see with these 4 pedals is Boss's propensity to evolve in their designs. Both the CS1 compression sustainer and the TW1 touch wire featured a mode selector switch in the middle, and this is just a taste of things to come from Boss. Boss had already released a graphic equalizer with the GE10, but you can't really class this as a pedal because it didn't have a foot switch. The GE6 was a shrunk down version of the GE10 for the compact pedal line. It features 6 different bands that you can boost or cut. 1978 was the year that Boss released their highest ever selling pedal and their longest running pedal, which was the DS1. This is still being manufactured today. It's been used by many legends over the years. It's one of those ones that has a very much a love-hate following, so other people love it or they hate it. I'm sort of coming around to it. I never used to like it, but I do appreciate it more than I used to. Now I've set this up with a fairly harsh sound because I'm going to pair it with the GE6 to show you how you can use this to cut some of the fizz out of the DS1. The DS1 here was the first Boss pedal to use the classic 3-knob layout. Now I happen to really love pedals that have this layout because I find that they give you options without giving you option paralysis. Many of the greatest Boss pedals ever made use just a simple 3-knob layout. In 1979, Boss released 3 new pedals, all of which follow the same uniform 2-knob layout as the original Traffic Light series. The most famous of these new pedals was the Boss CE2 chorus pedal. The other 2 pedals that came out in 1979 are very much related to each other. So we had the NF1 noise gate and the SG1 slow gear. Now interestingly, these are the exact same circuit. The only difference between them is the direction in which the signal runs. They run opposite to each other. What the noise gate does is that when your volume gets below a certain level, it fades out and then leaves you with a nice quiet stage sound. What the slow gear does is the exact opposite. Every time you play a note, it fades in. It gives you a sort of violin or cello-like quality to your guitar playing. Just like the SP1 Spectrum, the slow gear here is one of the rarest Boss pedals ever made, owing to the fact that it wasn't very popular and it wasn't made for very long. Interesting fact about the NF1 here, these are one of the most common and cheapest Japanese-made Boss pedals you can buy. And you can actually have them modded to have the signal go in the opposite direction and make it into a slow gear. So if you can't afford a slow gear, and these are incredibly expensive, get one of these, get it modded for about $100 and you'll have yourself a slow gear. In 1980, we get 2 new compact pedals that came out, one of which was the PH1R. Now I think you'll remember 1977, one of the first pedals they brought out was the PH1. These two pedals are almost identical except for the extra control that they added, which was a resonance control, which is why they call it the PH1R instead of the PH2. Now, going back to the DS1, the DS1 was wildly successful and it had this 3-knob layout. Boss started to then convert several of their pedals into this 3-knob layout over the next couple of years. The PH1 was the first to receive such treatment. The other pedal that came out that year was the BF2 flanger, the Plum Wonder. Now, you'll notice this has the number 2. That's because there was actually a BF1 pedal that came out in the late 70s. This was a larger box pedal that wasn't part of the compact series. The BF2 is a fairly significant pedal for a couple of reasons. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that this was the first low voltage flanger ever made. So up until this point, flangers started to come out shortly after the first chorus pedal was made in the late 70s, and most of which had to be run straight into the wall. The BF2 here could be run from a 12-volt power supply or a 9-volt battery. The other significant thing about it is it's the first Boss pedal to have 4 knobs instead of 2 or 3. This will become important later on. Now we're up to 1981. And in my opinion, this is the single greatest year in Boss's history. But before we look at the pedals that came out that year, 3 pedals actually went out of production. One of them was the PH1. Now that's understandable given the fact that the PH1R had come out the year before. Another one was the SP1. This just wasn't selling, so it went out of production. And the third one was also one that was replaced that year. So the GE6 here was replaced by the GE7. Now, the GE7 was a slight upgrade from the GE6. It adds a 7th EQ band, which is 6.4K, but it also adds a master volume. Now, the thing about EQs is when you start to add frequencies, it actually adds volume to those frequencies and it makes your sound louder. You can attenuate this with the volume control. So if you cut frequencies, you can add more volume. If you boost frequencies, you can pull it back a little bit. So that allows you to get a more even volume across your settings. Next up, we have the CS2 compression sustainer. Now, this would probably be in my top 5, maybe my top 3 favorite Boss pedals. I have one of these on my board at all times. The CS2 here is not just the 3-knob version of the old CS1, it's a complete overhaul of that circuit. I have covered this in detail in another video, so I won't go into it, but the CS2 is a very different beast to the old CS1. That same year, they bring out their first 3-knob overdrive, the SD1 Super Overdrive. Circuitry-wise, this is related to the OD1. It's fairly similar. It's kind of the 3-knob version of that particular pedal. They also bring out their first compact delay in the same year, the DM2 delay. This is an analog delay. It was the second analog delay that they brought out. The first one was the DM1. This was a big box pedal that came in the same chassis as the CE1. The reason that I believe that 1981 was Boss's greatest ever year was that all 4 pedals made that year are bona fide classics. The CS2 is one of the greatest compressors ever made and has been used by players like Dave Gilmour. The DM2, again, one of the greatest analog delays ever made and has been used by countless people and is highly sought after. And both the SD1 and GE7 are so popular that they are still made today over 40 years later. 1982 was the final year of the Japanese era Part 1. In fact, I refer to it as the transitional year because there were a lot of changes that started to happen in 1982 that had an effect on what would come next. Firstly, we had two more pedals that were made redundant. So the CS1's days were numbered when the CS2 came out in 1981, and the slow gear here wasn't selling, so Boss removed it from their catalogue. In keeping with their classic three-knob designs, Boss released the OC2 Octava. Now you'll notice with the model name OC2 that there wasn't actually an OC1. This becomes a characteristic of the Japanese era Part 2. They stopped using the number 1 because, well, 2 is higher, 2 is better. It shows progress. So from now on, pretty much every new Boss model that would come out would start on the number 2. As I mentioned earlier, Boss were always looking to evolve, and this was evident with the CE3. Now, this was the first compact pedal to have stereo outputs. It was also the first compact pedal to have a metallic paint job. And it's the only Boss pedal ever to have 3 knobs in a row like this. So it would have been easy for them just to do another 3-knob triangular layout, but they decided to put them all in a row. The problem with this on this particular pedal is that when it's on the floor, you can't actually see the LED and you can't see whether it's on or off. Interestingly, the CE2 was still being made nearly 10 years after the CE3 was brought in to replace it, owing to its sheer popularity. The CE3 never really took off in popularity. There are a lot of units out there, and because it was underappreciated, you can pick up an absolute bargain on the second-hand market. 1982 was also the year that one of the most unique, rare, and collectible Boss pedals came out, the VB2 Vibrato. The VB2 is a very interesting pedal. If you remember back to 1978, we saw 2 pedals that came out that year that had a mode selector on it with a big switch in the middle. Now they would take this to a new level with the VB2 by having 3 different modes. And rather than putting a switch there, we have a 3-way rotary knob. The VB2 has 2 main modes, latched and unlatched. In latched mode, it just works like a normal pedal. You stomp on it, it comes on, you stomp on it, it turns off. In unlatched mode, this is where things get a little bit interesting. The effect only comes on when you hold down the foot switch. This is another first for Boss, the first integrated foot switch. The last pedal of 1982 was a bit of an oddball. It's the PSM5 power supply and master foot switch. This has about 3 different uses. So what you can do is just by having it in your signal chain, it can act as a master switch. So your guitar goes in here, comes out there, and when you stomp on it, it actually acts as a mute switch. It also has a 9-volt output that has enough current to power 5 other pedals. In fact, this was created to go in their new creation, which was the Boss BC6 pedal board, which could house up to 6 Boss pedals. The idea is that you put this into the pedal chain and you use it to daisy chain power to all of the other pedals. But probably the coolest thing about this pedal is that it has a send and return. So it has 2 channels. It has a green channel and it has a red channel. The green channel is the normal channel. So while ever the LED here is green, you're just getting your dry signal going through. If you don't have anything plugged into the send and return and you turn it on, it will act as a mute. If you do use the send and return, you can have multiple pedals in the send and return of this and turn them all on at once with the click of a button. Looking at 1983 and beyond, Boss would take two of their pedals and use them as the templates for pretty much every pedal that they would bring out for the next 8 years. That was the BF2 flanger and the VB2 vibrato. Just about every Boss pedal that would come out after this would feature 4 knobs, either 4 controls or 3 controls and a mode selector. So that was the Boss Japanese era part 1. And I'd have to say this is probably my favorite period in Boss's development. There's a certain simplicity to a lot of these pedals. They're very, very musical. They don't have 1,000,001 options. They're very easy to dial in, and most of them had really great tones. Stay tuned for the Boss Japanese era part 2. But as always, I'd like to hear from you guys. Is there any of these pedals that you're particularly fond of, or that you maybe owned and sold back in the day, or that you maybe never got along with? I'd really like to know. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. You can support this channel by going to the Middle Age Gear Junkie store and buying some merchandise. And you can also join the Middle Age Gear Junkie Facebook page. Other than that, my name is Jason. See you later.